specializing in PR and communications, strategic advising and research, and intercultural programming. For background, our company was founded in 2016 to promote a more equitable and culturally immersive approach to US-Africa partnerships with mission-aligned leaders, companies, and organizations, all with the aim of making an impact on the social issues that we are most invested in. Co-founded in St. Louis, Senegal, and currently headquartered in New York City, Baobab has a team that is based all around the world in Senegal, Kenya, Rwanda, Nigeria, Tunisia, South Africa, and the United States. So as a globally based company that has been remote since its founding, we are heavily invested in the ongoing conversations on the future of work in Africa. As PR experts, we are especially interested in the intersection of communications and the future of work. For all the communication experts on this panel and in this room, staying on top of the trends and projections of where work is headed in the next 20 years will help us to be well prepared to best serve our respective markets. For this reason, Baobab has been pleased to partner with West Africa-based market research company LOOKA to conduct a study asking 600 young people in Johannesburg, South Africa, Lagos, Nigeria, and Nairobi, Kenya, about how they envision work in Africa in the next 20 years. Select findings from this report will inform our conversation today about how we as communication professionals can adapt our work to best address the realities we will face. Without further ado, I welcome my illustrious panel to introduce themselves, telling us where you're from, the communications work that you do, and briefly answering this first question. As a communications professional, what comes to your mind when you think about the future of work? So I will start with Gabriela.
Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot, Lara, for having me. Hope you can all hear me well.
Yes.
Awesome. So my name is Gabriela. I'm the CEO of a communications company in Nairobi, Kenya, called BDDL. That stands for Bold and Decisive Design Lab. So we are a hybrid company in the sense that we look at communication as a science and as an art at the same time. So what we really focus on is bringing the best disciplines of human-centered design, which is a softer, more human and more kind of intangible benefits of communication, and merging them with the hardcore data science and more fact-focused approaches around data, and marrying the two to create human experiences and communications that are effective. So our main areas of focus as a company cut across 4 main areas. So one, we look at strategy, and we focus also on brand development and communication. We focus also on aspects of customer experience and experience design. Us living in a digital era means that a lot of the experiences we're having with businesses, brands, and the likes are, through digital. So we look very keenly at that as well. And we're also very big on data. So the 4 main areas that we look at. And to your question around, the future of work as a communication specialist. So I look at it in different ways. One is in terms of fulfillment and, like where we are at right now. The way I look at it is in terms of adoption of tools and, building ecosystems that really support the ability of people to work in a space where, brick and mortar offices, for example, are becoming less and less utilized. And in the same movement, it's also looking at accommodating hybrid models. So especially from the onset of the pandemic, what we've learned is that a lot of the work that corporate Africans are involved in can actually be done from home. So what we're seeing being more effective and, being taken up more and more is now, hybrid models. So as soon as, offices and borders have slowly been opened since the last year, we've seen a lot of people now coming together and, mixing and matching a few models where some people work remotely, and on other days you're working from a physical space together. So I see that hybrid model being adopted more and more in several other spaces. The other thing to consider when thinking about the future of work and where we're headed is what that means for the roles we have known in media and communication. So in terms of the job titles, the roles themselves, and the skill sets required to fulfill some of these roles. And those are taking a lot of different shapes and phases, especially now also with the influence of technology. Jobs are looking very different. Skill sets of specialists in the communication space also looking very different. And I know we're going to discuss more and more about that as we move along, but those are my initial thoughts on that.
Thanks so much for that, Gabriella. That was a wonderful introduction. Koye.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Thanks, Lara. It's amazing that, last time we saw each other, I think the world was a different place when we were trying to launch the Milkmaid movie at the UN. My name is Koye Adeboye. I am from Lagos, Nigeria, but I'm based here right now in suburban New Jersey. I lead our global communications efforts for the Spotlight Initiative, which is a partnership between the European Union and the United Nations to end all forms of violence against women and girls. We'll get into a little bit about what we do at Spotlight a little bit later, but to answer your question, Lara, about the future of work, I think for me, when I think about that, I think about micro-targeting. Really the challenge, I think now especially with the pandemic, I think there's information and cause saturation. Everyone has heard everything 100 times. People are online so much, consuming so much content. So the challenge is, how do we then drive awareness into action? How either cause-related marketing, or even for products and services, how do you make that transition? How do you get audiences to act the way you want them to act? I think Gabriella said it well. If you don't have the data and the intelligence as to who your audience is, I think you're going to fail in today's communications, today's market. Audiences are no longer geographically fenced. It's really getting down to really data-driven sort of tendencies that audiences have, and understanding that those audiences also shift. So you could talk to someone this time of the year about this particular issue, and then if you're not nimble enough to change your strategy later on in the year based on what's happening, you lose that audience as well. So leveraging the new technology that's available, social media targeting, for example, AI, and developing feedback loops so that you understand what your audience wants sort of constantly, I think, is the main challenge for the future of work in communications.
Thanks so much for that. Definitely a lot of interesting topics brought up on micro-targeting, and we will come back to AI and intelligence later. Mamouna.
Can you hear me loud and clear? All right. Hello, everyone. So happy and honored to be part of this panel. So I'm Maimouna Dembélé from Senegal, beautiful Senegal, sunny Senegal. Well, I'm a former journalist, but like I say all the time, once a journalist, always a journalist. I just don't work with traditional medias anymore. So I'm the vice chair of Music in Africa, where I take on communication, all the communication aspects. But other than that, I'm also the communications, marketing, and public relation officer for Total Senegal. When I think about the future of work on the continent and even overseas, the first thing that comes to mind is digital. It's building new ecosystems that are different from the traditional ones, because today companies need to focus on, I think, discovering which mobile platforms, because when we're talking about the motherland, we talk about mobile a lot. Each and every one has a mobile phone and can access internet easily. So it's really discovering those mobile platforms, knowing where exactly their customers are, and finding new ways to reach them on those platforms, pretty much like my peers had said earlier.
Thanks so much for that, everyone. Wonderful introductions. So I want to loop us back because the topic of AI was brought up. So there were some findings in the LOOKA report based on AI. So AI and automation are on the rise, as we know. So in the report, 64% of respondents said that they are not worried about AI or automation putting their jobs at risk. In your opinion, how do you think AI will transform communications as a field in the next 20 years? Welcome anyone to come in.
Okay, I think I will give my sentiments first. I think that the report and the findings gave very interesting insights. And the most interesting thing, the way I think about AI in this space, is that with the era of technology, 20 years could happen in as little as 2 months or 2 years, or like things are happening so fast that we can't even imagine, we couldn't possibly imagine what the next 20 years will look like, just because of that very quick progression, because we are already living in an era where AI is doing a lot in terms of our communication. And so what you've seen, for example, in terms of like in media, in the media space especially, anybody can now be a journalist. Anybody has access to a mobile phone, can take a video, can film it, can distribute it, can share it on digital. And you'll see a lot of media houses actually attributing some of the content they share publicly to information that had been shared by individuals just like you and I. So that access and that ability to have that level of power to share information is one great thing that's happening as a result of the technology around us. But what happens rather is now, or on the downside, would be the fact that this allows a lot of access of fake news, for example, in this space. And then AI comes in because it helps us to identify and differentiate what is fake news versus what is the real truth. And we're just continuously kind of seeing this progression happening. I think another way we've been seeing it a lot in the advertising space is from the onset and the existence of billboards. Digital interactive billboards are all over the place now. The adoption is kind of still being taken on slowly by slowly, but that already points towards the early stages around targeted marketing, just like Koye had mentioned. And it's even for us to imagine what the next few years would look like, I think some industries are already leading in that. For example, the gaming industry is introducing us a lot, to very crazy and insane, virtual universes, yeah? And all of that is being driven by technology, by AI. It's kind of bringing together the best of the physical and the virtual worlds. So I see that influencing a lot about how we communicate. We're already seeing it also, happening with lifestyle brands, all the virtual try-ons that we can have on. It's far much easier now to buy a lipstick and buy a pair of Nikes than it was a couple of years ago, because you can put it on and kind of see how it fits you, how the lipstick looks against your skin. And all of that is part of fulfilling experiences that we as consumers are having as a result of digital platforms, and as a result of AI coming in to address or fix some of these things. So it's going to be interesting just to watch what the next few years would look like. But I think we are already in that process of experiencing what AI feels and looks like among us. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. Yes, the future of work is now. Yes, AI is on the rise. Yes, very excellent points. Does anyone else want to come in?
I think.
Go ahead.
Oh,
go ahead,
no. Go ahead, Adoya. Sorry.
Okay, Mimuna, you can go ahead.
Oh, thank you. That's sweet of him. Thank you. No, but Gabriela said it. I mean, it's happening now. It's happening now. AI will allow businesses to optimize all their operations just quickly and in a very more effective way with just a simple click. So it's already happening. I think, like she said, it's going to be quite interesting to see what's going to happen in 5, 10, 20 years from now, but it's already on the rise. And I think that today companies should not only keep that in mind, but just develop new ways of communicating with their customers, knowing that, AI just makes life easier for them, and it's just more effective for them.
Thanks. Lara, just so I understand, you said 64% are not worried?
Correct, of respondents, yes.
Well, look, I admire their optimism, but they should be worried. Absolutely. I think, Gabriela mentioned a bunch of these things. You already have marketing bots, you have news bots, you have customized news readers that are delivering information based on what the AI thinks that person wants. That's completely agnostic of human interaction with the editorial process on that news. You have, very soon you're going to be able to dump a whole bunch of video files into an automated video editor with limited instructions. If you could go to an event and cover an event, or go out somewhere and shoot a bunch of content, and the AI will automatically make an edited video for you based on your rules. I think even Google Photos does this now, where I'll get a notification on my phone that says, oh, don't they grow up so quick? And I look at it, and the AI has made a decision to edit a 1-minute video based on photos and videos of my children and sets it to music. And it's amazing, so that's where we are. These jobs are going to go. But the trick is, for any young person out there, especially in Africa, if you're thinking of communications professional role, you still have to try and focus on the parts of communications that are about problem solving and around storytelling. Like I said, that whole challenge on turning awareness into action, that's part of the human creativity. That's not something a robot can do effectively. So I think there will be those roles out there, but a lot of the existing communications roles are going to go away, no doubt about that, sooner than 20 years, actually.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think definitely the direction that communications is heading, there will be a pivot in the jobs that are available in the future. But so I like where we are with AI and this digital communications conversation. And Mamoun, I want to pose a question to you, just looking specifically at your experience in West Africa's cultural sector. And with artists and creatives. So what role do you see digital communications play in creating opportunities for artists and creatives in the present and in the future?
It's funny you ask that question, because when COVID came, we just held our heads and we were like, we're dead, no more festivals, no more cultural events. What's going to happen? For example, one of the biggest festivals that we do in every city every year for music in Africa, it's called Access. So the first year we did it in Dakar, and then the year after we went to Nairobi, the year after that we went to Accra, and last year we were supposed to be in Tanzania. And so we're like, okay, what's just going to happen to all these creative people? And we remembered that there was this great thing called the internet. So everything we did in 2020 happened online. We held a couple of festivals online, which is of course a different feeling, but you have to adapt, and we have to adapt. And the world we live in today is different from the world we used to live in 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So we definitely need to find new ways to put our work out there and to communicate with people. And that's what we did. Everything happened online. And we have a couple of artists who, because, everyone was, of course, panicking and just wondering what would happen to their art. And we had a couple of showcases online, had a couple of, like I said, panels and festivals online. And we actually even had a couple of artists who came back to us and said, well, you know what, after all, this digital world is not that bad, because I was able to sell my music online, because I was able to have more fans online, to build a fan base. And one of the things that we've also seen is Youssou N'Dour, who's a huge artist, who does not use the digital tools that much. But last year, he hasn't traveled in 2 years. He wanted to share his music, and he had to find ways to share his music. So he was on online platforms. He was on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook, you name it, just talking to his fans and playing out of his couch. It was great. And it was, like he was saying, it's just something he had discovered because of this pandemic, but it was working. He had thousands and thousands of people watching him from all over the world, and he could just communicate and share his music out there. So we have to keep that in mind. And I think that whether it's just artists or just people, we have to keep in mind that, we have to have new ways of communicating. Today it's WhatsApp, tomorrow it's maybe going to be something else. But the digital world is out there and it's not going anywhere. So yeah, it's been, like I said, there's something good out of this pandemic because it showed us that it was possible to do things in a different way.
Yes, 100%. And just to ask a follow-up question, because just thinking about what Gabby had mentioned in her introduction about the hybrid model that corporations have been looking at with remote work and working physically in the office, I'm curious as well with creatives as they're going into a post-COVID world, will there be a similar hybrid model? Will some of these digital streamed concerts, or some of the other ways that we've digitized art throughout the pandemic, do you see them remaining and being a bit of a hybrid, or do you think that when things open up, people will go back to physical concerts and from there? So what are your thoughts on that?
I think people will do both. Of course, you miss that, you miss that physical touch of, there are a couple of concerts, actually, there are a couple of lineups in Dakar these coming weeks. I think people just miss being around each other. It's a different feeling, when it's digital, you're at home, you're alone. So people will definitely go back to our old ways, but I really do think that creative people will keep in mind that they will not be able to reach as many people as they want if they do not put their work on the digital platform. So I think that it's just going to be a mix of both.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. So I just want to pivot to looking at representation in the workplace as well. So pivoting to Okoye's work in Spotlight Initiative. So fighting gender-based violence is essential for enabling more women and girls to participate in the future of work. So tell us more about the communications work that you have been doing as part of the Spotlight Initiative and its mandate to fight GBV globally.
Thanks, Lara. So yeah, Spotlight Initiative partnership, 500 million euros between the EU and the UN, and we're programming a model. It's basically, we have this theory of change that if you do these 6 things comprehensively and you do them at scale and you fund them, that you will move the needle on ending violence against women and girls. We've been operational since 2018, and in fact, this year, as just before this event and right after this event, we're getting all the results that have come in from the first 2 years. And I have to say, it's really fantastic. So stay tuned. I ask everyone who's watching, follow us on all our channels. We're going to be making some really good announcements as to the progress we're making in spite of the pandemic. Now, in terms of the communications work that we do, it's really centered around 4 objectives. We want to first raise awareness of violence against women and girls. Most people don't know that the global number we use is 1 in 3 women alive will experience or have experienced physical or sexual violence in their lifetime, and all the different, what that actually means, what the different forms of violence there are. A lot of people don't know, so we do a lot of work trying to raise that awareness. One of my favorite objectives that we have is about impact and stories, trying to humanize the work and let women, we believe all the women and girls that we serve have agency and are the best ones to tell their own stories. So trying to find ways to meet people where they are so that they can share experiences in first person voice, either on video or in human interest stories. That's a lot of our communications. That's a basis of everything else that we do. We have a mandate on the communications front to also help shift the norms and attitudes that actually permit violence to happen. So it's a programming intervention, the folks who work on programming, but we advise as communications professionals, if they have a programming idea or an initiative they want to do, we will advise them and say, actually, you know what? Maybe for this, radio isn't the best way to go. Maybe let's tweak this and use social media as a way of reaching these particular young people, right? So we're working with our program folks on that. And then the last one is visibility. We want everyone who works with us, all of our partners, to feel proud that we are, we're delivering and we're a good return on any investment that's made for the UN member states and for the countries and governments that we work in. I think, again, since the pandemic, one of the things we've really tried to switch and pivot on, especially on the third objective about changing culture, is we're working with influencers now. We did a bit of a study and realized that working with influencers is far more effective and cheaper than your traditional marketing. Again, back to the micro targeting and audiences, even mid-level influencers, they get a lot of engagement with their audience. So we take this very complicated and dark and heavy subject like violence against women and girls, and then we created something called a culture change commitment, which is basically a few steps that any creator out there can go through. You understand that no matter what vertical of content you're producing, that you have a role to play in not perpetuating stereotypes that permit for violence and all its forms to happen against women and girls. And then we let those folks come up with their own stuff. We don't say, hey, we, the UN, think this is the way to do. We just set the guidelines. Here's what you should be aware of. And we've had some really, really interesting things happen. Like last year, Jubilee Media got 6 rappers, 6 hip hop artists into a conversation about sort of breaking down Cardi B's song WAP. Is that like a female empowerment anthem, or does it perpetuate violence against women and girls? And it's got well over 1 million views now and thousands and thousands of comments where people who are scrolling through social media, they're seeing a whole bunch of, I don't know, TikTok dances or whatever, but at least now they can get engaged in a conversation that they may not even know is about violence against women and girls, but it's actually sort of reaching them with a message. So yeah, please follow us on all our channels. On Twitter, we're at Global Spotlight. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at Spotlight Initiative. And yeah, you'll see some of the work we're doing there on Comms Online.
Thanks so much for that overview, and definitely make sure to check out Spotlight Initiative online, and we look forward to hearing the announcement. So just to follow up, so in your opinion, what do you think needs to happen in the next 20 years and beyond as well, if you want to speak to that as well, to include more women in the future of work? And what role must communications professionals play to make this happen?
Okay, the good news is we already have a blueprint on what needs to happen here, and they're called the Sustainable Development Goals. That's 17 goals that all member states in the world, 193 member states agree to. Here are targets and things we need to get done by 2030. So we're 19 years away. So the timeline works with your 20-year question. I believe none of them. The data shows that absolutely none of the 17 goals will get met or achieved if the levels of violence against women and girls remain what they are, and gender inequality remains what it is. There's no way, even everything from saving the oceans to climate change, women and girls are the key. When you invest in women and girls, in their education, in their safety, in their health, and in their capacity, the returns are far more than you can do with anything else. So to answer your question, I think everyone, all stakeholders, governments, private sector, you just need to invest in women and girls. And I think if you make that, it's a catalytic change. You will have more women in the workplace, and it will improve economies at multiple scales. I mean, I think we're leaving about $12 trillion or so on the table every year just from the lost participation of women in the workforce. As comms professionals, what can we do? I think really finding stories of change that can inspire folks. Either a girl sees a story of someone who she could be, someone from her community who's like her, who has made a change or who's actually made some sort of progress in her life. Maybe that inspires her. A story about a man who is now an agent of change against violence in his community. Maybe other men see that story and decide, what I'm doing here is not what I should be doing. I'm inspired in a different way. Our challenge is really trying to find those stories and tell them in a way that the audiences we want will actually will react to them. And it's getting harder and harder to do that, I have to say.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I agree 100%. A lot of powerful points made there. So just because you mentioned the use of influencer strategies and kind of looking at influencer strategies versus advertising and marketing strategies. So I wanted to bring Gabriella in just to hear your thoughts, just in terms of what you've been seeing on the trends in advertising and marketing in Kenya, and also your thoughts on influencer engagement as well.
Okay. First of all, I accept the comments coming in. Koye for president, that is, totally agree. Even as you refuse, you may just insist. That's great. I think it's really great to learn about what Spotlight is doing. And to your point about influencer marketing versus what you've seen as traditional advertising and marketing avenues, I think I've seen great trends around that in this continent. So, sorry, in this part of the continent rather. And what we've seen is for more human-centered stories and to some extent also lifestyle brands, or rather depending on the different industries being targeted, influencer marketing tends to work quite differently. I think in the same conversation around AI and bots, what we've also found is that some influencers have been buying, likes and follows and the likes. So what you see is that, and I'm sure Koye, you've probably seen this in your experience as well, is that by the time you're selecting the influencers to work with, it's because you can see a considerable amount of genuine engagement and love and interaction with their audiences, because they're, with the advent of this technology thing, then it means that anybody could buy anything and pose to be whatever they desire to be online. So with a lot more scrutiny and a lot more keenness on who is following which influencers and what kind of engagement they actually have on the people. I feel it's one of those like really strong, marketing avenues that we've seen. And back to your point around what kind of trends we've been seeing around the advertising space here. Just like Maimuna mentioned, last year was very significant in terms of how brands were interacting with their customers. So we saw a lot of brands pull out their advertising spends, I think, while trying to figure out what was happening, trying to figure out their numbers and how they were going to sell and the likes. We saw a good number of brands reduce their advertising spend. And those who did, retain their spend, focused more on indoor advertising. Again, there was limited movement. So far fewer people were advertising outside, and you could see more people focusing on TV advertising, radio, digital as well was really big. And it's more or less the same, again, as what Koye mentioned around storytelling, which has been a significant theme, especially now that we're seeing more and more brands have gotten more comfortable with the impact of the pandemic, and we're seeing more and more people getting more comfortable around spending and taking more risks, even with the nature of their advertising. I think one thing we've also seen is that people really get tired of hard selling, and stories are becoming far more significant because it's a far more softer way to sell, and it brings back the human touch around products and services, kind of being put in people's faces. I think one of the other things we've also seen that's quite significant is omnichannel marketing. So you'll find brands are being more intentional about, integrating a variety of channels within their marketing plans. And video is also taking a very huge, preference around all of this. And it cuts across video that, has been filmed by the corporate or the brand selling, and like in Koye's case, videos that are driven by the influencers or by the partners that you choose to do the advertising with, which has been very interesting to see. I think the other thing is that with digital now, and people tricking algorithms and playing around with them a lot, what I've seen, at least in the last few months, is a lot of small brands are experimenting much more with their advertising online. You will see a lot of local partnerships between several small brands coming together who are offering complementary services and the likes. I've seen a lot of brands experimenting with Instagram shops, Facebook shops, and it's very interesting to see them do that. And more people are getting into content marketing as well. So just like we mentioned earlier in this call, is that there's like information overload. There's not a shortage of content around us. And so the brands that are winning are the brands that are choosing to create really strong brand stories and focusing more on their content marketing more than they are on performance marketing, for example, which seems to be done by brands over a very short period of time. So those are some of the most significant, kind of trends we've been monitoring over the past few months.
Thanks so much for that. Thanks so much for sharing those trends. So just to loop in, so in looking at, considering some of the different mediums, I'm also curious about some trends that have been seen in radio. So Mamuna, I know you have a strong background in radio, so I'm curious what you have seen in terms of any changing trends in radio from just over the course of your career, and where you think that's headed in the future of work.
Well, once again, we're talking about the digital world. When I started radio over 20 years ago, never in our wildest dreams, we could have think that someone can start a radio out of his room. So today, with all the podcasts, traditional radio stations are not what they used to be, because now it's a different world, and everyone chooses to listen or to see whatever they want to see or whatever they want to listen to. So it's very trendy right now, podcasts. I know that I do not listen to traditional radio stations anymore. I'm always on the internet. I do follow a few podcasts, and then it's just, that's where we're going. That's where we're at right now. And that's definitely where we're going. Sometimes I'm like, I think that in 10, 15, 20 years, there will be no more traditional radio stations because they will just not be able to keep up. We've seen a couple of radio stations closed on the continent because they cannot just keep up. And like I said, we live in a digital world, where over someone like me who's over 40 years old, when I see my children, they don't listen to radio stations. They will listen to a couple of podcasts. Everything they need, they will look it up on the internet. So I am sure that my son and my daughter are not going to listen to radio stations in 10, 15, 20 years from now. So yes, and people understand that. I think more and more people understand that. One of the podcasts that I've been listening to, because I'm just from that era, the hip hop era, is this new podcast, the Midnight Miracle with Dave Chappelle and Talib Kweli and Yasin Bey, which is an incredible podcast. And I'm like, okay, so even people like this, famous people like this, understand that this is the world we live in today, and this is the new way of doing things. People are on the internet, and whether we want it or not, it's happening now. So if some people are not on board, they better get on board, because it's just the new way of doing things.
Yes, 100%. And just to loop onto that, or to piggyback on that, so we have different communication professionals in the audience that may have entered into their respective field in a more traditional sense and are now having to pivot or to remarket their skills. So let's say you have someone that's a video editor, and when they entered into the field, that was before all of the automation of 1-minute videos and everything. So what would be your advice for those that have more of like a traditional mindset or have a traditional skill set when it comes to communication? What is your advice for how they remarket themselves for the future of work, or redesign their job titles and their areas of expertise? So that's an open question to everyone. We know if you need to repeat, because I know that when different directions.
One of the things that I'm going to add to that is one of the example I gave you earlier. It's when we talked about Yusundu, who's 60 years old. So he's old school. And even during the first live, you could just feel like he was not really comfortable with this new way of communicating. But by the end, like at the 4th, 5th, 7th live, he was just so great at it. I think that people understand that even the ones who are more traditional, than digital, and who do not really understand the digital world. And we still live in a part of the continent where, you know, some people, those who are over 50 years old, are pretty skeptical about this digital world. They understand that they have to deal with it in a way or another. They have to be out there. And like I said, for people in the creative industry, they've been home for a year and a half, and they just needed to find ways to put their work out there. And, you know, at some point, you just have to find the perfect balance. I'm not saying that you have to live the traditional way at 100%, but people just need to find the perfect balance to be able to talk to their audience.
I think to add on to what Maimuna just said, what we've also been monitoring on this side is that the older people are, to some extent, it's really just all about being open to new experiences and trying out new things. So we're finding that the older generation, especially artists, are kind of more and more, you know, kind of opening up to collaborating more with the younger people, because in that sense, it becomes automatic that they learn through them. And it's just to say that, you know, some of them are also considering targeting newer audiences, so younger people, because there's a high chance that because they grew up doing their music or sharing their art in a particular way, and the people of that generation are used to the art being shared in that way. But what you're finding now is younger people who are more tech savvy, are more open to interacting with their audiences online, are more keen on finding their audiences where they are and where they're more comfortable. Some of these collaborations have been really helpful, first in terms of helping to continuously build their audiences, and at the same time, just bringing like fresh vibes to our radios and our TVs and our music and entertainment industry in general. So that's also another way to look at it.
First, shout out to Maimuna for the podcast drop, Midnight Miracle. I mean, just fantastic, and how it's a great example of the kind of storytelling where I understand that they were trapped in a storm and they were just in his house. So they went down and started recording stories of it wasn't a planned thing, and it's now this huge hit. So yeah, I mean, these are people who are notoriously don't do interviews, don't do podcasts, don't do content, and now they've created something. So I suggest everyone check it out. It's really, really, really good. To answer your question, I think in communications, you can fall into this generalist trap, right? Where people say, oh, you know, graphic design and video editing and photography and all is all the same. So you're a comms person, you do all of them, right? I think that's, I almost want to caution that you should try and figure out as a comms professional who's trying to do a shift, first, what are you good at? What is your best strength in all the different possibilities that communications roles offer? And kind of specialize in that. And there's some really good ones that you can specialize in that I think are timeless, that actually not a lot of people do very well. Number one being writing. Like, I don't care what social media and what's gonna happen. If you are a good writer and you know how to write, you will always have opportunities and you will always have roles. And if you're not a good writer and you don't know how to write, you will always be limited in what you can do. So I advise everyone, try and improve your writing, try and strengthen that first as the basis. And then everything else, I think, kind of comes from that. You can learn how to video edit, even though really good video editors takes a lot of time and experience and practice. So you will not be able to compete for opportunities with folks who just do that all the time. So try and get the writing basis strong, and then you can try and find another area to specialize in, and then market yourself very effectively in that particular skill set in all the areas and avenues that folks like that market themselves. And I think that there's going to be opportunities if you do that. Just don't fall into the, yeah, I'll do social media today and I'll do graphic design tomorrow, and I'll do video and I'll do writing. I think it's a trap.
Yeah, I think that's very sound advice, and absolutely tapping into writing as that foundational skill and being open and creative to exploring other areas and yes, going from there to find different specializations and being flexible within the discipline overall. So there's one final question that I want to ask before we wrap up, just to loop in one more interesting finding from the report. So while 71% of respondents think life is better in their respective city, 68% would be ready to move to the village in the next year if there was an opportunity to make good money there. So should the current push for investment in agriculture lead to more lucrative job opportunities in rural settings, we may see a rural to urban population shift on the continent in the next 20 years. What is the role and relevance of communications in regards to that shift?
Can I take that one first? Okay, all right. So if I understand, majority of respondents are willing to move to rural areas because of agricultural opportunities if they present themselves, right? This push to, well, okay, that's such a big if. There's a huge caveat in that, because I don't think the data actually supports that that's happening at scale. I think as we sit here right now, if I remember correctly based on UN stats, sub-Saharan Africa urban population is 41% urbanization. As we sit here today, around 41%. 2050, it's going to be 58%. So the challenge is really, how do governments, cities, how do you build cities that are going to absorb millions of young people that are going to be moving in from rural areas into cities? And how do you provide jobs and the infrastructure and everything else that, that requires? I think that's where we're heading. I also think, we talked about automation a bit. I think with automation in farming, which is what you really need at scale for Africa, I think that actually is going to reduce the headcount of the number of folks you need farming in agriculture. I think with the technology, even if there is a big push in agriculture, I think you're going to have a lot of automation. It's not going to be that many human beings doing it, relatively speaking, to what we're thinking of now. I don't know if anyone's seen this video on YouTube. I suggest just Google it. Just Google making agriculture sexy. There's this young Zambian farmer, I think Tamara Happy Face Zonda, I think her name is, she's at a UN event and she sort of speaks publicly, and it really illustrates the challenge of trying to get young people interested in agriculture. And I'm kind of skeptical on that. But okay, let's assume your scenario is true. Somehow people are moving from cities into rural areas to do agriculture. For comms, the role here again is going to be really finding the stories, and not just finding the stories, but enabling the audiences to connect to their peers and their folks who are actually having those success stories. I'm more likely to believe someone I know who's posting something on Instagram to say, listen, I moved back to the village 6 months ago. I started this farm. Check me out. I bought this new house. I've got this new car, blah, blah, blah. Then I think that's going to attract. No amount of government propaganda or, people are just too smart. No one's going to fall for that. I think if it were to happen, it is unlikely. So I think you even have higher resistance from whatever public to believe that this is actually, I should pick up my life and move from an urban area to rural areas. I think governments really are trying to focus on services and industry as a way to gainfully employ mass numbers of young people in Africa more than agriculture.
Mr. President Koye, what to say after that, Mr. President? No, one of the things that I totally agree with is finding those inspiring stories. If I take the example of Senegal, I have a friend who grew up in the US, moved back a couple of years ago, and when he was just sick and tired of big cities, and that's why he left, he decided to leave the US. So when he came to Senegal, he was like, there's no way I'm living in Dakar. So he went into a rural area. He had a piece of land he had bought a couple of years ago. So started working on the land. And he's so digital. So he's on Facebook and he's on social media. started talking about his story. And I mean, he's even open, his farm is open to people from sub-Saharan Africa and other countries who are coming just to learn. But because there was a success story, there was a beautiful story to tell. More and more people here in Senegal are leaving the city to go to rural areas, because just the quality of living, it's just easier, and it's especially people who have children also. More and more people are going on the small coast and leaving Dakar. But like you said, you have to have a beautiful story to tell. You have to have an inspiring story to tell. When we started this live, Lara was talking about how Baobab Consulting was born in Saint Louis, and Liz, I'm pretty sure she knows that part of the north. So it's in the north, this small village in Ganjul. There's also this young man who tried to immigrate to Spain, I think, a couple of years ago. It did not work. He came back and started creating just a small village in his village. And now he works with hundreds and hundreds of young people, and they created so many beautiful things, created an economy for each and every one who's living there. So those are beautiful stories that you can share with the other young people, that will give them, that will give them hope, not only hope, but also, they will see themselves and be able to move. But if you don't tell stories, if you just wait for governments and heads of states, nothing is going to happen. So of course you have to go towards those people who have already started things, who did not wait for any government, who did not wait for any leader, who are doing great things. So yeah, definitely those stories, and Koye was even talking about it earlier when you asked the gender issue question, Lara. So and we are very visual. We come from countries where people like to see things, so it's really important to just exhume those stories.
Yeah, and just to add on to what both Memuna and Koye have said, I think that more and more young people, especially those who find themselves, raised and working in urban cities, are beginning to feel like there's a lot of pressure in these spaces. And just like Memuna mentioned, the rural life is beginning to look like a better plan for most people, but not in the context of going to start life there afresh. It's more like, I've experienced the city life, and now I feel it's important for me to go and either rest outside in the rural areas or find some little project to do around there. There are more and more young people who are saying these things. As to whether or not they're going to affect them, it might just be that there's a lot of social pressure in urban cities, and we're thinking about going rural, but not necessarily to focus heavily on agriculture. But not to say that agriculture is not, young people are not also thinking about doing it, especially now with all the tech advancements and the fact that the way we're doing agriculture now compared to how, for example, our forefathers did it, has in context the idea of being more effective, being more efficient, utilizing the land much better, implementing smart farming and the likes. And I think we'll see more of that coming up. But just like Koye mentioned, that will likely mean that we won't need that many people on these farms. We'll just need to optimize on the spaces that we already have existing. So that's another way, for us to consider that as well.
Thanks so much for these insights, everyone. Yes, definitely a lot of interesting information just shared. So we have 2 minutes left. So I think we'll just wrap up now. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to my panelists. Thank you to attendees. Thank you to Baobab being represented here today. Thank you, Gabby, woman of many hats, also on our Baobab team. Thank you, Liz, in the background as our cheerleader. And thank you to Memuna, to Koye. Thank you everyone for joining. So I hope all of you have a good, wonderful rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the Africa Comms Week. Hope you're registered for a bunch of other events, a lot of other amazing topics being discussed. And yes, have a good, wonderful rest of your week, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.